Hi, and welcome to He Has Answers, a completely free online ministry resource that, while still very much under construction, contains more than enough information to help you come to know the God who made you, knows you, loves you, and whom wants you to come and know Him so you may be saved and have everlasting life. In this series of videos, we'll be reading through a downloadable PDF file of an unfinished free ebook titled He Is, the Truth that God Exists, and the Thorough Investigation of Undeniable Proofs, so that you can see that beyond a reasonable doubt, God is real and the Holy Bible is His Word. If you'd like a copy of this PDF file for yourself, it can be downloaded here by right-clicking this link and saving the link as is in a folder on your own personal computer or even in your mobile device. Now let's begin. Hi, and welcome back to the reading of the free ebook, He Is, the Truth that God Exists and the Thorough Investigation of Undeniable Proofs. It's available in PDF format from hehasanswers.com. The one benefit of being able to listen to audio rather than read through a book is that you can still follow along with the message, even while carrying on with whatever else you might be doing in your day. So I invite you to do just that. But first, let's pray. God, please give me a soft and humble heart as I listen. Please open my eyes and my ears and change my spirit so I may know you and worship you in spirit and in truth. We're continuing on now in part 3. The devil is real and he wants you to go to hell. The fourth dimension. Did you notice how, in my friend's account, he associated the prism he was seeing with the fourth dimension? How he was inspired to make a connection of it with a higher fourth dimension is anyone's guess, but I'm hoping it reminded you of our discussion quite some time ago in There Is a Heavenly Realm, where we talked in a fair bit of detail about a possible or likely fourth dimension and the reality of a spiritual heavenly realm. During that segment, I had invited you to watch a brief YouTube video aimed at helping us perceive what geometric objects could potentially look like in a higher dimension. You may recall that I also warned you that we needed to tread softly as we approach the topic of the fourth dimension because it was quite likely, in a spiritual sense, a dangerous rabbit hole. I had said that there was a version of that video I had seen first, and that I perceived this alternative version to have a more sinister agenda than simply helping people consider mind-bending 4D geometry. At the time, I'd not wanted to jump the gun, so to speak, because all of this talk about satanic agendas had to come first so that you'd be more prepared mentally for the topic. Exposing it all then would have been too premature, too unbelievable. But I trust that your eyes are being opened to the reality that surrounds us, and such exposure won't sound far-fetched anymore. You see, my dear friend, caution needed to be exercised because many people have delved into fourth dimensional thinking and found themselves lured into a false spiritualism because of it. As my desire and God's purpose with our discussion is to help you come to God and know about the adversary trying to hinder you and not carelessly lead you through information that could easily tempt you and waylay you, I did not want to thrust you headlong into that alternate version, which seemed intent on ensnaring the minds and souls of viewers. Charles Howard Hinton, who was the late 19th century British mathematician to coin the term tesseract for what we now call the hypercube, was instrumental in helping 4D geometry become more accessible to the modern public of his time. But it was Hinton's own meditations on the fourth dimensional realm and his exercises involving envisioning objects from that realm which radically altered his perceptions of spirituality. He would himself move towards mysticism throughout his life, and his work and theories and mind-expanding drills would draw the attention of many occultists. Even Aleister Crowley would twice make mention of Hinton in his book from 1917, Moonchild, accidentally making this reference by using his father James's name, however. If you watch the YouTube videos I listed, which were meant to help us all see how confounded our minds might be at seeing beings coming out of a four-dimensional reality due to our perceiving in 3 dimensions only, you may recall the name Ludwig Schlafly. Schlefly was the Swiss mathematician from whose perspective the narration of the video came. Although Schlefly had worked on four-dimensional polytopes, the term we now use to describe the higher dimensional equivalents to our 3D polygons and polyhedral, for the latter half of the 19th century, his work was not fully published until 1901, some years after his death in 1895. Sadly, his retirement was spent studying Sanskrit and translating the Hindu religious texts, the Rig Veda, into German. Why was a Swiss mathematician who studied theology in 1834 compelled to translate scriptures honoring false gods written at the same time the Israelites were writing the Old Testament? One can only speculate thanks to the lack of information on the topic, but I suspect it may have to do with his own mental opening to the fourth dimension through his meditation on the mathematics. If you watched the video until the end, you probably remember the sensation within your mind as you grappled with the more complex polytopes as they rotated around and around while their vertices and sides folded through themselves. If you, like I, tried to wrap your head around what exactly was happening, you likely also felt the sensation of something unusual occurring within your brain. When we stop and consider, though, that Buddhists meditate to open their mind and finally reach a point they refer to as nirvana, which is a state that literally means to be blown out, like an oil lamp, or how East Indian religions trance-inducing meditation is meant to bring them to a similar state they called moksha, it's no wonder that Schlafly, after years of delving into deep contemplation of these orthogonal shapes, where at first it may have been difficult, but eventually one can easily be at one with the shapes, so to speak, because they've simply relaxed and opened their mind and surrendered to the phenomena happening within it during such meditations, it's not surprising that the Rig Veda is what Schlafly would gravitate towards. Nor is it surprising that occultists influenced by Eastern mysticism would see great potential and power in the consideration of such a dimension and the objects therein. It's really all about having mentally expanding experiences. This, of course, is spiritually dangerous. Johann Carl Friedrich Zollner, who was a German professor of astronomy at Leipzig University through the middle of the 19th century, at this time of great fascination with the fourth dimension, also pursued this matter into the spiritual. Zollner would become interested in the relationship between the spiritual and the fourth dimension in 1875 when he visited British physicist and chemist Sir William Crookes. Crookes himself had become enamored with occult spiritism after attending a seance in 1867 in hopes of contacting his recently deceased 21-year-old brother. This led to years of trying to prove the reality of the supernatural at great cost to his reputation in academia. He'd also involved himself with various paranormal investigative organizations, including the Society for Psychical Research and the Ghost Club. Worse than this, though, friend, was his involvement in the Theosophical Society, an occult group founded by none other than the inspiration for Aleister Crowley herself, Helena Blavatsky. Theosophy, of course, is the belief in the collection and amalgamation of mystical and occult doctrines from every belief system that has ever existed in pursuit of enlightenment under the false pretense that it leads to a person's spiritual salvation. One of the Society's goals was to prepare the minds of humanity for the arrival of a world teacher who would lead mankind in its spiritual ascendance. Who, my dear friend, does it sound like they were supposed to prepare us for? Yes, the Antichrist, of course. Crookes would also find himself as an initiate of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, yet another secret society built upon the demonism of a mystery religion. Sir Crowley had once been a member of this group early on in his unfortunate journey as well. Meanwhile, Zollner would team up with the American medium Henry Slade in hopes that Slade would be able to assist him in his experiments involving the fourth dimension and spirit beings from within that realm. The basis for the experiments was the hypothesis that spirits could receive objects by somehow translating them into the higher dimension, where they would rearrange them and then present them back into our third dimension. An example of this was to get small leather bands onto the narrow sections of a wooden table leg, even though the diameter at either end of the leg prohibited them from sliding on. This would mean that they had necessarily been bent or distorted in the fourth dimension to be placed on the table leg. The experiments were all similar in nature. However, it was found that Slade had been fraudulent in all of his interactions with the spiritual realm when his entire career proved to be that of a charlatan. Whether these experiments worked or not is not the point here, friend. The point is that something about the meditation upon the fourth dimension leads people into spiritual deception. As stated much earlier, it really does appear that God has designed our world and our minds to be limited to 2D and 3D thinking and perspective while we live on this dimensional plane, at least for now. To bend the mind and open it to the fourth dimension seems to have the potential of leaving people transfixed upon it. Like the occultist influenced by Hinton's work, the unsuspecting can find themselves lured towards what is known as sacred geometry. I'm not kidding. While doing this research, I came upon a website detailing, quote, the interface between science and the transcendental, end quote. Not only was sacred geometry in the fourth dimension relied upon heavily, but occult chemistry was also discussed, different from ancient alchemy, which also quite often involves mysticism. Does this remind you of how I'd stated that the aim is to blend science with false spiritualism to prepare us for the great deception which will accompany the arrival of the Antichrist? Everything on that website is perfectly suited for New Age thinking. The internet is actually replete with this sort of talk. One thing you may have been reminded of when viewing the videos on 4D geometry is what's known as tessellation tile art. These intricate geometric tile mosaics have been created throughout history, even into antiquity, and their significance is not simply artistic, nor is it merely mathematical. It's also clearly spiritual. Just as one can stare at the rotating, sliding shapes in the 4D geometry videos and slip into a trance-like state, so too can a person as they stare at and contemplate the ever-repeating patterns in tessellation tile art. When one looks at the larger cell polytopes Schlafly described, they should be reminded of Buddhist mandalas and Hindu yantras. Whether they be in the form of tilework or tapestry or painting, the sacred geometry involved has always been used for transcendental meditative purposes and is obviously meant to help facilitate the expanding and opening of the mind to the spiritual realm. This is why they've existed for eons and why people do indeed have supernatural experiences from fixating upon them. They were even found adorning the interior walls of ancient Sumerian temples where people would worship. Sadly, we find sacred geometric artwork even in the stained glass of cathedrals where people are to gather and worship the one true God in spirit and in truth. If you're familiar with the eccentric Spanish artist Salvador Dali, you know that he utilized 4D geometry in his artwork as well. One of his most famous works has Jesus Christ crucified on an unfolded tesseract titled Corpus Hypercubus. After returning to his Catholic roots post-World War II, Dali, who became enamored with sacred geometry in the fourth dimension, slipped further into deception, arriving at a belief system called nuclear or quantum mysticism. When I'd first watched the original version of the YouTube video on 4D geometry that I've stated was so troubling and even dangerous, I felt spiritually unsettled. I did not know why exactly, but I understood there were supernatural reasons for it. Out of curiosity, I opened up the channel page for the individual who'd posted this video. Instantly, my wary feeling was validated. This person had not only posted this, but also videos about the Tetragrammaton, or name of God we spoke of earlier, which refers to YHWH, or Yahweh, found in Scripture. Well, this video very quickly, in only 3 minutes, walks a person through satanic teaching to deceive them into believe that just as God said, I am, you too can look in the mirror, ask yourself who God is, and respond with confidence and authority. I am. Even the accompanying music was clearly meant to alter the state of the mind so it can more readily accept the message. He's also got an old video from New Age guru and Eastern mystic Deepak Chopra. I mentioned him earlier as being one of Oprah's favorites. Interestingly, he's even got a couple videos that seem to be exposing the Illuminati. Seeing though that these other videos are of an antichrist nature, it's obvious that this is just deception whether the owner of the channel realizes it or not. He's still just being used as a pawn to get Luciferian ideologies out to the masses. And the devil is adept at dangling something with one hand to get people to look one direction while he works with his other hand to sow deception. We already saw in He Uses the Media to Shape Our Thinking and Control Us that this is called the bait and switch. In his posted video on 4D Geometry Explained, the narrator no longer has what sounds like an American accent like you heard in the video I linked for you. No longer is the speaker conversational and somewhat animated. In the video I watched originally, the narrator reading Ludwig Schlafly's lines has a British accent and reads in a dull, quiet, subdued, nearly monotone voice, and it gets slower and more monotonous as we're directed to focus deeper and deeper into the 4D shapes as they rotate for us. The original video is part of a series on dimensions created by some French mathematicians. Originally produced in French, it is available freely under a Creative Commons license so that others can translate it into their own language for further dissemination around the globe. It's available in at least 8 other languages as well as nearly 24 subtitles. But if it was available in the English version you heard, who made the drawing English version I heard? Why was it made in such a fashion? By accident or purposefully? Meanwhile, the background music remained the same. It starts off with Tchaikovsky's, but then shifts to a song. It starts off with Tchaikovsky, but then shifts to a song called Rupture by a modern composer named Florent Geis out of New Jersey. The music, which utilizes disharmonic vibrations, becomes more and more disjointed as we progress through the mind-expanding exercise. The cacophony heard seems intent on unsettling the spirit. At the same time as this is happening, our mind is being opened, and a monotonous voice of the narrator, free of any inflection, delivers dialogue to us filled with long gaps, even at one point commanding us simply to look. Even more bizarre is how Schlafly's character personifies the objects, referring to them as beauties and majesties. If his dialogue by the writers was based off of old discovered journals, I wouldn't be surprised to learn whatsoever that he truly believed what he was seeing within his mind were beings or entities within the fourth dimension as he seems to be thinking of them here. Either that, or that's how the writers perceive them after copious time spent meditating on four-dimensional shapes themselves. The entire episode seems intent on putting the viewer in a state of hypnosis, where their mind is then vulnerable. This is exactly like a session with a hypnotist who speaks in an even tone, slowly, methodically, drawing the listener into a trance while directing them to look at a spinning wheel or a swinging pocket watch. This is known as eye fixation for the purpose of hypnosis induction. It's evidently what we were exposed to in the film, and it's obvious that the YouTuber whose video I first saw knew exactly what his posted short might do to people and open them up to. He probably experienced something very similar himself before delving off into the New Age spirituality and wanted to help others in their own false enlightenment. In fact, his channel is called Evolution 292. Tragically, that video has had over 2.9 million views, and he has 5.5 thousand subscribers, even though he hasn't posted in 2 years and never posted anything terribly creative or noteworthy. Even the disgusting Yahweh Tetragrammaton video has 1.6 million views. How many do you think, my dear friend, have been lured on a path to eternal destruction because they've ingested these films and been opened up to something diabolical? What of the music by Florent Geis? Was it itself spiritually dangerous? Was the intention for it to be so? I'll start by saying that after listening to most of his album, He's clearly brilliant and talented. However, it's mostly of the same vein, and yes, I would say it is spiritually dangerous and able to do something to a person's spirit as they listen to it. Was this his intention? Possibly not, but it really doesn't matter because it's the spirit behind him which guides and uses him. Because we gravitate to music and tones which resonate with us on an emotional, mental, intellectual, and spiritual level, be it due to the lyrics or the music, or more commonly both, I did not really enjoy listening to his album. I felt it was unnerving as something was definitely amiss. This reality is why many people, including myself once upon a time, cannot listen to Christian music for very long. It wars against their spirit, which is rebellion against God. This is also why, if you look at Florent Geist's supporters on his Bandcamp.com page, you will see that some of them have avatars depicting the all-seeing eye, Eastern spiritual imagery, pyramids, an Enso or infinity circle made from what looks to be a hurricane, and even Baphomet, because his music resonates spiritually with such spiritually deceived people. Heartbreaking. This may actually be a good time to briefly revisit electronic dance music, which we discussed before. I mentioned how it did something to me in my flesh, and how I chose to fast from it for a time, and still to this day will not expose myself to it for prolonged periods, although I certainly still appreciate its energy and catchiness, and will likely involve myself in it more often if eventually married, because then the sexual energy it's obviously meant to arouse will have a place to be spent under the protection of God. Well, I stumbled upon a short YouTube documentary while doing this research uncovering the occult beginnings of trance music. I can't say I was shocked, as the entire EDM music industry seems aimed at doing one thing, promoting the do what thou wilt mentality, while directing people towards hell, but I was still very disturbed. Discussing it earlier would, like the discussion of the fourth dimensional videos, have been premature. Now that you're familiar with many of the spiritual ideas and their propagators, you should know that even Timothy Leary, the disciple of Aleister Crowley and peddler of LSD, said of the electronic dance music movement and the drugs often associated with it that it was clearly tied to shamanic spirituality and just as useful for achieving the end goal of evolving our collective consciousness through opening the individual's mind to new philosophies. The video is titled Rave New World and does a considerably good job revealing a lot of the demonic spiritual workings through this genre of music and the concerts it spawns. Not every idea displayed in this video is necessarily in agreement with God's word, however, and there are moments when even New Age ideas seem to be introduced as spiritually true when they're just as false as the rest. Nevertheless, it's worth watching to help us be aware of many factors within our reality. Just be mindful that although it exposes much, that does not necessarily mean that it can be wholly swallowed as gospel truth. This is because even the maker of this documentary, Round Saturn's Eye, is himself sadly also a deceived puppet of Satan, believing himself to be a Christ follower to sow deceit which leads to death, while also revealing some of the devil's workings. More typical bait and switch. Round Saturn's Eyes, Rave New World. It is soul-wrenching to understand that many people are lured by mind-expanding activities such as 4D geometric envisioning onto a downward path leading further into spiritual deception. Like those seeking nirvana and moksha who believe themselves to be ascending into the heavenlies nearer to God, all such people are actually being led into a pit. Whenever the scientific meets the spiritual apart from God, we have the occult. Unfortunately, much quasi-scientific philosophizing is actually what has influenced and shaped the minds of the scientific community, which is set out to explain the natural and the unexplainable apart from the God who gives wisdom to those who seek it. And that, of course, means that an Antichrist spirit has influenced much of what we now hold to be scientifically true. It is never too late, my dear friend, to be freed by God from the shackles of wrong thinking until it is too late. Thanks for listening to this video, and I hope that it blesses you. Please do share it with others so they may have the opportunity to understand this incredible truth. Be blessed.